and also pay our respects to elders past, present and future, and extend that respect to all Indigenous Australians present today. Welcome to our hybrid meeting to those online and in the room. Thanks today will be given by Cheryl Lacey, followed by the Loyal Toast, presented by President Adrian. Please ensure your glass is charged.
Okay. Squashed between chickens in wicker baskets and a farmer with a goat on a local Balinese bus, while more locals sit packed like sardines on the rooftop, wearing headphones to drown out the snoring of strangers and the sound of the whining engine on a night train in Vietnam, handing a bottle of water to a homeless man with soiled pants, the stench colliding with a 43-degree heat inside the faulty carriage of a New York subway, tapping on my credit card for a 1-hour trip from London to Leamington Spa to visit a treasured friend of 30 years, being escorted safely by police officers onto a train and out of a crime zone in Chicago, reflecting on my viewing of the Shroud of Turin as I travel by fast train to Paris. These are but a handful of many public transport stories from my travels to more than 65 countries. But my favourite story, however, is one that belongs to all Australians. In 1854, the train from Port Melbourne to Flinders Street Station connected new arrivals from Europe to a new life in Melbourne, Australia. Victoria, actually, back then. This, our first Victorian train line, was built on a vision to join fellow citizens in a free, prosperous and responsible democracy. For good food, fellowship and the reaffirmation of this vision, we give thanks.
And Rotarians and guests, a toast to Australia and Rotary International. Australia and Rotary International. Thank you, and please be seated. We're now breaking for lunch and we'll reconvene around 1:10 p.m. And for those of you who are online, please take up the offer of the Zoom breakout rooms, which will open shortly. Thanks. Well, thank you, members, visitors and guests. It is my great pleasure to welcome you all to our 27th meeting of this Rotary year. It's our 4,970th club meeting in our 102nd year. And importantly, it's now only 16 weeks until the Rotary International Convention is here in Melbourne. I trust you, those of you who are here on the 35th floor of the Sofitel are enjoying the superb lunch provided by the number 35 team. It's great to be back here. Our guest speaker today is Professor Graham Currie, Director of Strategy and Outreach, Chair of Public Transport, Professor in Transport Engineering, Department of Civil Engineering at Monash University. Graham will be speaking on new developments in public transport and will be fully introduced by our Chair of the Day, Madeline McManus. But in the meantime, would you please join me in making them both welcome? Also here today, we're delighted to have Tony Pearce, Victoria's Inspector General for Emergency Management and the Chair of the Emergency Services Foundation. Tony is hosted by past Treasurer Peter Hanlon and the Community Welfare Committee. We'll be hearing from Tony shortly, but in the meantime, would you please acknowledge him and make him welcome? And it's always wonderful to see our own members return after a prolonged absence, and in particular, Tony Greenwood. Where's Tony? I saw you before, Tony. It's wonderful to have you back here today. We do have one guest of Rotarian today, Shiren Anwar, who's a guest of Robert Fisher. So welcome back to Rotary Melbourne again. It's great to see you here. Would you please join me in making everyone welcome? Now, Tony Pearce is the chairman of the board of the Emergency Services Foundation of Victoria, a not-for-profit organisation which brings together Victoria's emergency services agencies, protect the mental health and welfare of those who serve within those agencies. Emergency services personnel were particularly impacted by their involvement in recent bushfires and floods. Tony is here today to provide a briefing on a wonderful event, Tony's Trek, that Tony is undertaking across Victoria. Championed by our club's Peter Hanlon, Rotary Melbourne's support and participation was improved in June 2022 by the Community Welfare Committee. Rotary Melbourne has engaged the support and participation by clubs of districts 9790 and 9820 on the route of the walk, which mirrors a similar walk in 2018 by former Police Commissioner Graham Ashton, who acknowledged at the time the major contribution that Rotary clubs across Victoria made to its success. I'd now like to call Tony Pearce to the podium to tell us about the upcoming Tony's Trek.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you, Adrian, for the introduction. Thank you, Peter, for being a partner with us along this journey, and I'll explain a little bit about that in a minute. Nice to see you all, and also really nice to see Mary again. Mary and I have a working relationship that goes back many years from her time in emergency services as well, so it's great to catch up with Mary. What I will do, I've only got a short period of time, I'll just very quickly just tell you who the foundation is. It's an organisation that was created post Ash Wednesday. Mick Miller, who was the Chief Commissioner of Police at the time, had quite a bit of money left over as a result of public donations for the firefighters who'd been killed in Ash Wednesday, and proposed to the government that a foundation be formed for the expenditure of that money over coming years, which was done, and it was used. The foundation pretty well were responsible for providing immediate cash relief to families of injured or deceased emergency service workers when that occurred, and also providing scholarships and so on for research projects to be able to come back to benefit Victoria more broadly. That was great, went on for many, many years. Of course, the money started to dwindle because it was just from the original pool and the interest on that. And more importantly, I guess that the responsibilities that the foundation was trying to cover off on, such as I said, looking after these families, was being picked up through legislation, through the agencies themselves and their work cover obligations, etc. So as a result of that, in 2018, the foundation had to look at itself, decided that it needed to change its focus, change its structure, and at that time decided to focus on the mental health and well-being of our people, and particularly the mental health and well-being of our people at the upstream end, that is before they get to the stage where they are impacted to an extent that their lives and their employment starts to become an issue for them. So we're trying to get in at the early intervention and the prevention stage, because there's lots of money and lots of effort after people become injured, but we're trying to prevent that happening. So that's pretty much what the foundation is about. We have 14 member agencies that are all of the emergency service organisations, plus quite a number more that are within the emergency management sector. And our I guess our existence is based upon, or is premised upon, the contributions that those organisations make as members, and then, like so many other not-for-profits, chasing grants day in and day out. So that takes me, I guess, to Tony's Trek. The Trek really came about as a thought of mine where, unfortunately, another friend of mine took his own life in our sector, and I've had more than one that have done that over the years. And when that one occurred in more recent times, I was sitting on the deck out at home having a glass of wine with my wife, and I said, you know, there's got to be something that I can do, at least from my perspective, that would help contribute to trying to stop this from happening, or at least decrease the prominence of these things occurring, or the frequency of these things occurring. And I thought, I said to her, I'm going to go for a walk, and she thought I meant go for a walk around the block at the time. I said to her, no, I said, I think I'm going to go for a really, really big walk. I said, and it has to be big to get the attention. And in doing that, my purpose was to actually raise awareness of the issue that we have with our people, but also to raise awareness of the existence of the foundation. The funding side of it obviously then came on later on, but the two purposes for me were about raising awareness of these two issues. So that was it. I mapped out where I thought I would go, and I finally worked out that it was going to be from East Melbourne, from our State Control Centre in East Melbourne here. I'll be walking from there to Mallacoota. I'll turn around at Mallacoota, come back to Now an Hour in East Gippsland. I'll then head north over the top of the Alpine Range, Mount Hotham, and back down to Wodonga on the other side. And then from Wodonga, I'll head back to Melbourne. So it's a distance of around about 1,450 kilometres. We've added 50 because by the time I stagger all over the place and as I get a bit tired, I'll probably have about 50 k's of staggering to be done. So we're saying somewhere between 1,450 and 1,500 kilometres. The funding aspect of it that's now in place is to try and raise some money for three important elements of our business, two of them in particular. One is about creating a lived experience capability within the sector. That is being able to train people to safely tell their stories and then to professionally film and record those people, to be able to then provide that as a resource to individual members within the services, but also for the agencies themselves to use as part of their mental health programs. And the Royal Commission, the recent Royal Commission into Mental Health, identified lived experience as being one of the primary enablers to people actually getting better before they become so ill that they can't get better. So we're focusing on that as one of our programs. The other one is to pilot a residential wellbeing centre, which is based loosely on work that's been done in North America and the UK, tailored to the Australian and particularly the Victorian environment, where we would not build a facility, but we would utilise facilities for residential purposes to be able to bring together small groups of people who are, if you like, wonky, getting a bit wobbly, but don't actually understand why or what's happening to them, and are probably in the best position at that time for an intervention with professionals and others who have been through the experience to be able to assist them to understand how they can actually prepare themselves for what's coming, how they can better manage their own environment, but also to give them some hope and some realisation that this is not actually always a bad outcome for everybody. Yes, there certainly are some really bad outcomes, and in many cases they absolutely can't be avoided, unfortunately. But there are many, many people along the way who, with the right advice, the right support and the right guidance, can actually get to a better place. And what I'm really keen to do is to try and stop this situation of me meeting so regularly people who are late in their careers, who are almost unable to function within their home and their work environment, then go into retirement and then face the prospect of having a retirement of where they see there is absolutely no hope for them. And of course, when you leave an organisation in the type of sector that we're in, all of your support, the whole cultural experience that you've had for your whole working life is lost. And those people go then already being, if you like, impacted into an environment where they feel that there's no hope and there's no support for them. And that's what we're trying to achieve by actually doing this trek. So the flyer that's on your table at the moment provides you just a very brief highlight of the three programs that we're talking about. It gives you the website address, which if you go to, there's a lot of information about the trek. There's a video of me as a talker. If you're sick of me now, then you'll be sick of me if you listen to that. But it's interesting, I guess, because it gives you a lot more context and a much better understanding of what I'm doing and why I'm doing it. And then down at the bottom left-hand corner of that flyer, there's a QR code there. And if you go onto that QR code, that will take you to the donations area on the website as well, if you are inclined, or if you know others who might be inclined to donate towards the program. So I know we're on a fairly short timetable today, so I don't want to take too much more of your time up. But I just want to thank Rotary generally in a very, very meaningful way for the support, Peter, and your committee for getting on board and supporting and partnering with us. I really do appreciate it. And as I've said to everybody else, if there's anything you can do just simply to raise awareness of the event, then for me that is gold. The more awareness there is, the more potential there is that we'll achieve our objectives. So thank you very much indeed for today and the opportunity to speak to you. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Tony. We certainly look forward to receiving updates of your trek and also having you return afterwards to hear how it all went on. We've got a special gift for you today. These are our past president, Phil Endersby, and his company Wilderness Wear have these 200% Australian-made special walking socks. They're scientifically proven to get you around Victoria. That's right, Phil. Hand sewn by Phil himself. We'd love to see how these end up after 1,500 Ks as well.
Where is Phil?
Phil,
your company is actually one of my sponsors and supporters, so thank you so much. Thank you.
Well done.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Adrian.
Thank you. So just one brief notice today, and that's of course a reminder about tomorrow, Thursday from 5:30. We'd love to see all members, friends and families join us at Rotary Park for a self-catered picnic to kick off our Rotary year. As I've mentioned before, Rotary Park was established in the 1930s by our club and the City of Melbourne. It's located on the corner of Domain Road and Anderson Street in South Yarra. Also happens to be opposite the Botanical Hotel and other cafe restaurants. So if you do need extra supplies, easy to nip across the road as well. Reason for, of course, visiting Rotary Park, other than to have a good time, it's also the location of our peace bells, which will be launched during the International Convention. And our project leader, Rob McGurk, will be on hand to talk through what's happening and to show you what it's all about. So it'd be great to see as many of you as possible tomorrow night, and flyers are on your table. Now with that, the important part of the meeting, the raffle. Okay, and who's close by? I think, Madeline, I'll get you to draw the... Very good. The winning ticket today is a black ticket, C76. We don't. We have Helen. Well done, Helen. Now, if you just ignore what's actually in the bag for the moment, there will be something else coming your way very soon. It's a very good prop anyway. Thank you. And with that, it's now my pleasure to hand this meeting over to our Chair of the Day, Madeline McAnnis, to further introduce our guest speaker. Thank you.
Good afternoon. It's my delight to be here this afternoon and introduce one of my favourite humans who's made a significant impact in his area of public transport internationally on a stage for more than 30 years. Professor Graham Currie has been a research leader and internationally recognised for more than 30 years in his field, and he has published more research papers in international leading peer-reviewed journals in his field than anyone else anywhere in the world. And we are very lucky in Australia to have someone of his calibre as part of our research expertise capability in the area of public transport. He's worked with some of the leading public transport organisations across the world, including London Transport. He's managed numerous public transport research and development projects internationally that have made significant impact. He's been a special advisor to international agencies in planning transport for special events, including every Summer Olympics since 1996 and the Hajj pilgrimage at Mecca. And he also had some input in some of the transport planning we did for the Rotary Convention that's coming up this year for our bid phase, to make sure that we actually won the bid here in Melbourne. He's just returned back from Washington, DC, where they hold the world's largest international conference for transport. He is the only person in the world who has been awarded twice the best paper at this renowned international conference. And he's the first, as I mentioned, he's the first person ever to have received that prestigious award, not just once, but twice. He's an elected fellow of the Academy of Technology, Science and Engineering, or ATSE, and he was awarded the Australian Transport Medal by Engineers Australia for significant contributions to transport in Australia. Please join me in welcoming Graham to the stage, where he's going to talk to us about new developments in public transport. And I would also ask you to be very ready to question him in detail, because he enjoys an active debate with his audience. Please join me in welcoming Graham Currie. Professor Graham Currie.
Hello. You're part of this as well. Yes, so I've published more papers than anybody else. Yeah, okay. How many have you read any? You know, it's a specialist field, so yeah, it is more than anybody else, but you know. Anyway, thanks very much for inviting me. This is a rather prestigious event, and also you're a great group. I would like to point out that, of course, one of your past presidents was John Monash of Monash University fame. So, you know, the links between us are quite strong, I think. And I know that you've had our Vice-Chancellor and some very good engineers speaking here. Of course, John Monash, what you might not realise is John Monash was a railway engineer. So, yes, I've got this terrible difficulty of trying to live up to him, and he's just an incredibly impressive chap. You know, in the era, he was Jewish background, non-conventional English, and the things he had to strive against to achieve things in his life were incredible. And boy, did he achieve a great deal, you know. One of the greatest Australians we've ever had, I think. And of course, I mentioned he's a railway engineer. He developed the design of bridges, some of which are the leading designs in the world and are still built today. In addition, he built the outer suburban railway loop which doesn't exist anymore, but hey, we're about to spend a couple of 100 billion trying to do it again. So he was rather ahead of his field. Very impressive Australian. One of the things I'm always impressed by him is that, of course, he was made a Sir in the battlefield by the King of England. Now, there can't be too many cases where the King of England will knight somebody from another country, an Australian from the other side of the world. And why did he do that? Why did he have that honour? Because of the incredible work he'd done in bringing together people on the battlefield, the people on the front line, communicating with them. He was a great communicator. So, this is a really great thing, I think, was effective. And he brought all the technology together as well to get it to work. So people knew what was happening, and he was successful because of that. And of course, he's been involved in developing railways here, and so have I. In fact, one of my first projects I was ever asked to do was when I became the chair, I have a long history in working in public transport, I was asked by Melbourne City Council to look at the future of the city of Melbourne. It's about 2005. And at that time, one of the ideas I had was that we could maybe link the two major rail groups in Melbourne, the eastern suburbs and the northern suburbs, with a new tunnel under Melbourne. In fact, at the time, I thought this is an interesting idea. I'll draw a line on the map, and I just put a map together. I drew a line by hand, and that has turned into the Melbourne Metro Tunnel, which is now, at one time, it was the biggest infrastructure project in Australia. Now we've had every project competing to be the biggest one. And then it's going to be opening in 2 years' time. And one thing that worries me is that, I was literally in my study with a pen, drawing this down there, and the alignment they've built looks awfully like the one I put in the pen. And I do hope a bit of engineering went into actually deciding the final one. Now, I've been involved in looking at this. I do think it'd be a really impressive addition to Melbourne. I think we're all going to be wondering why we didn't build it earlier. But frankly, at the time, there was plenty of debate about the loony professor from Monash who wants to spend all this money on this irrelevant infrastructure. And I can assure you, we'll all be wondering why we didn't build more at the time. And that's been a part of my life. In fact, you'll see buried away in the work of the Auditor General some work I did for them, which really suggests that they might have underbaked the railway in the sense that they built a cheaper version when we may have needed something a little bit bigger and more robust. We'll see how it goes, but I do worry that it'll be so successful that there'll be quite a lot of crowding. Now, I want to talk about new developments in public transport, and that's one of them. But I thought, I should start by saying, well, why are we having new developments? Have you not noticed that we're always talking about public transport in the media? It's like a topic everybody wants to talk about in Melbourne. And why? It's because it's part of our culture, really. Trams are core to what we have outside the window here. When you look outside this window, you can't get development like we've got here without that previous infrastructure development. And, why are we developing? We've got the objectives to develop the city and to make it a better place. People are often asking me, hey, Graham, what's good public transport? Where do we lie? Well, I would point out that you could go to most cities in the world and they're striving to get one tram line, okay? And look out the window, we've got 30, Look at the work Sydney did to try and put a new tram line down George Street. The problems they had in that, and that was one. And we've been, operating 30 for close to 100 years. We've got to remember that we've had a very long history of doing things well. Now, the obvious other reason why we develop public transport in Melbourne is because it's not very good. Yeah. So on one hand, I'm telling you we've got a great system, and at the same time, we really need to improve it. It depends on where you live, really. If you're lucky enough to live in the inner suburbs, you've got quite good service levels, quite frequent services. Whereas if you live in the middle and the outer suburbs, where most people do, the average frequency of a bus in Melbourne is about 20 to 30 minutes. And I was working in Sweden recently, and I was explaining to them that the average headway number of vehicles per hour of flights between Melbourne and Sydney is better than the average frequency of a bus in Melbourne. So we have 15-minute flights, but if you want to catch a bus in Melbourne, it's more like 30 minutes. So we need a lot of reasons to get better, if you like. Now, the central reason, though, why we should be justifying, why we should be investing, why we are doing this, is because, frankly, we don't have a choice, okay? The private car has done wonderful things for this city. It's done wonderful things for the economy, but frankly, it doesn't scale up to creating a city at volume. And public transport's really good at that volume job. I'm going to tell you a little story from my career. It's a true story, because I had this job of dealing with some very motor-focused people in Melbourne, very famous people, to persuade them that they needed to use public transport. And this was the Melbourne Grand Prix transport strategy, the strategy to get people to and from the Melbourne Grand Prix. I was hired to help them, and I was in a startup meeting with the people that were running the Grand Prix. I have nothing against the Grand Prix or for it or against it, but I just had to plan the event. And we needed to get 250,000 people to and from the event in Albert Park. Now, in the room, there are a lot of motor-focused people, and they came up and started saying, well, we want this event to be really, really good, high quality, a real great example for Melbourne. Maybe we could get all of the taxis in Melbourne, we'll hire them, and as part of the ticket, we could get everybody in Melbourne have a taxi to and from the event site as part of their ticket. And that would be a really premium way of getting to the event. And I said, well, that's very innovative. You've got to start on a positive, I think, in explaining it, persuading people. That's a very innovative idea and very appropriate to your thinking. You know, you're a motor-based event and you want to create high quality, everybody, an exciting event, it would be a really good thing. But there are a number of things I need you to think about, okay? The first is, it's going to be hard to get all the taxis because they're already doing a job. But let's just assume that you can get all the taxis. That would be 3,000 taxis. There was 3,000 taxis in Melbourne then. And assuming that you could get all of them to give everybody a trip and maybe get 2 or 3 in each taxi, that means that we could get 9,000 people to the event site on the day. That would be really impressive. However, there would be a problem. You're going to have 3,000 taxis trying to drop people off. And I asked this question, have any of you seen 3,000 cars before? 3,000 cars? And you might think, well, I've seen a lot of cars, yeah. Well, no, you've never seen 3,000 cars before. You literally could not. I want you to imagine you're on Punt Road, looking down Punt Road in the peak of the peak when it's traffic congestion for several kilometers. You will be lucky to see 100 cars in that traffic jam, okay? Because literally cars are that inefficient. So imagine Albert Park with 3,000 cars, the biggest traffic jam you've ever seen, trying to get people on and off it. It just literally couldn't happen, okay? And so they said, oh yeah, I see, so it's quite a big of a problem. And I said, no, that's not the problem. That is not the problem you have. The problem is that you might have got 9,000 people to the event site. How are you going to get the other 241,000 people there? Because that's what they needed to do. And the only way to do that is by public transport. And they took on the mantle of running the trams in a special way to, the benefit of Melbourne's trams and so forth, to operate there. Because we need that volume. It's why we have trains running down here in Melbourne. It's why we have trams. Each tram includes the equivalent of about 1 kilometre and a bit of traffic. It's just efficient. And in my career, I have worked on many times on special events like the Grand Prix, because frankly, you literally can't get millions of people to places without a way of handling volume. The standard practice now in the Olympic Games is to ban all cars, because just even a few cars can really destroy the event for people, and people are happy to do that. In fact, if you look at some of the most successful financial cities in the world, the Zurichs, the New York cities, the Asian tigers, they're all running on mass transit systems, and that's what we are planning to do here as well. And of course, we have plenty of development going on. I mentioned Melbourne Metro. A story I do like to tell people is that the year that I recommended in my report to Melbourne City Council that we have the Metro was the same year I was working in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia on the Hajj pilgrimage. I was reviewing their transport systems for the Hajj. It's about 3 million people getting to and from the event. And at the time, they were using buses. For the event, it's once a year. They bring all the buses of Saudi Arabia to that event site to carry people around. And they have 80,000, or they had then, 80,000 buses came to the valley around Mecca. 80,000. Now, I've already told you what 3,000 cars would look like. Can you imagine what 80,000 buses would look like? It was the biggest traffic jam you've ever seen in the world. There's a city there called Mustalifa. They have an aerial photograph. I'd love to share it with you, which just looked like the biggest mess in the universe. And my recommendation that year was to build metros. They need a metro for Mecca itself and 2 or 3 down the valley where they run the event. And I can tell you that even though that year I recommended 3 metros in Mecca, and I recommended 1 metro in Melbourne, all of the metros in Mecca have been built. And it's 2 years yet before ours is going to be open. So yes, it does seem to take a bit longer to do things here. But there's plenty being done. We're finally going to get our Melbourne Airport rail link in a few years' time, which, you know, was opposed by some people at the airport. They were having great success at car park entry to the airport, but frankly, it's the same story as special events. The airport now realises it's on a growth, and it's a very great thing for our economy. It's on a growth spiral, but literally you couldn't get more people there by car. The freeway is already crowded in the peak. We see traffic congestion, and they've already built enough parking capacity. How many more car parks can you have? They completely have accepted this and realized they need the volume that a railway can give them. We also have many other developments going on in this city. The suburban rail loop, one of the largest suburban rail loops ever in the world, is planned for this city. I've been involved in developing a loop in Tel Aviv, and I was there before Christmas, and honestly, they really need that. They have no choice to the development they have. For us, it'll be more of a means of creating new development in the outer suburbs, because really, Melbourne has always been a bit too CBD focused. We need to be and spread out the development. It's a much more efficient way of running a city. I think people haven't quite understood what's going to happen to Ringwoods, Monash, and all these other places when we build a metro there, because we will literally create CBDs in those locations. There are vast business opportunities here, but I think a lot of the residents haven't really realized what's going to happen to them. And I completely have to say, it's a complete coincidence that the first section of this new metro will be between my house in Cheltenham and my work at Monash University, and nothing to do with that. Well, maybe I could just close by talking a bit about Mikey. I know that people were interested in what's happening with our ticketing system. Now, we've long had a problem with Mikey. Have people heard of this problem? Yes. Now, this year in November, that contract finishes and we'll have a new contractor, maybe the same old contract but a new system. A good question I'm often asked, well, what's gone wrong with Mikey? And I can't find out, frankly, because the government's embarrassed by it, the operators are embarrassed about it, there's lots of money involved, and it's hard to get what the truth is. My opinion probably is that the project was a bit underbid. They didn't have enough money, they were a bit inexperienced. They did a lot, given they weren't experienced to achieve things, but I feel that from the very beginning we were always playing catch up. Also, the world changed a lot, the requirements changed. These technologies are built for now, but they often change. And there's a new technology, and once you've underbid, the contractor obviously needs to get money, and they often will require more money. It's a difficult relationship, both for government. Also, things changed. For example, we'd like to use Apple smartphones to pay for fares. It's very common worldwide now. You know, the fact that we can't get that to work is not just because it doesn't have the capability. It can be that the providers, like the international agencies like Apple, aren't necessarily playing ball. So it's a complex thing, but the new system should be better. And I really hope we get a more positive outcome for this, you know, a system that people can really buy into and like. We never really got a chance to like Mikey. Whereas I look in Queensland, when they put their new system in, people started to realise how useful it was compared to the last one. In Melbourne, it's always been a focus on the problems. You know, it really is a PR problem. I don't think that was managed properly, and maybe they could use some professional assistance to make it more positive exercise, because the new systems are going to have some fantastic features. We can actually use our credit cards. We had an anecdote before, a fantastic anecdote about just using your credit card to pay for your tickets. And that's very feasible now. And your smartphone, or your watch even. And in fact, there'll be new systems and new methods that we'll be able to use for payment in the future, which we haven't even heard of yet. And that's one of the problems for the government and the contractor, is having a long-term contract, usually 10 years, that tries to add in things we don't even know are going to happen yet. All right, well, I could talk forever, but I'm probably boring you already, so I might take questions now. Thank you very much.
I'm really interested in your answer to this, and I'll try and do it as quickly as I can. I'm a big fan of the train. I use it a lot. I love riding my bike. I use that a lot. And I own a car and I use that. I'm particularly worried about the City Circle 2.0, having seen what happened to 2.1 or 1.0. This train line, extremely expensive from Cheltenham to Box Hill. I lived right close to Box Hill, one station away. I've got a really good mate in Cheltenham, and I've got three choices. I can jump in my car and see him in half an hour. I can jump on my bike, I can see him in an hour. Or I could catch a train into Box Hill. I can wait for a connection. I can ride his train all down the length. Then when I get there, I'm going to have to get a taxi, and then I'd go and see him. So which would I go? I would go half an hour. If I want some exercise, I'll do an hour. I'm not going to spend 2 hours to go and see your mate on a train. Yeah. It seems to me it's like from nowhere to nowhere. I know Monash, I used to go there, so it would have been lovely to have good transport there, but what else does it do? It's a city. There's a lot of reasons to come to the city. I come here all the time on the train.
Your anecdote is completely reasonable, you know, and the answer is there is no strong logic for building this for the travel and activity we have in Melbourne today. What will happen is that project will change Melbourne. You and your colleagues and family and friends will all be doing things differently, because Box Hill will be a CBD with lots of employment and activity. Your friends will all move to living in places and have opportunities to live near them. And it's really for 100 years in the future, railway. It'll for a long time struggle with the urban development as it is now. It's really for a long-term future. Now, they have developed the stations in a logical way. They've put them in places that are going to be growing. The Monash precinct, you know, the biggest employment precinct outside of Melbourne, that is going to be one of the focuses. And it goes all the way around to the airport. So that it does, we've always in Melbourne had this problem of cross-corridor travel. Everybody's focused on the city centre, where railways are good, but public transport's terrible across the suburbs. It's creating a new access for the very long-term future. And you may not be alive to use it, I'm afraid. There's the truth. But your children may well.
Sue McCarthy, as a frequent tram traveller, I can tell you one of the things that's very wrong with Mikey, and that is an enormous number of people never touch on. Now, I don't imagine that any of the wonderful new systems that you're positing are going to fix that.
Yes.
But it is a real ethical problem.
Yes, so we've done a lot of work on fare evasion, and we've saved in Melbourne $50 million a year since 2012 on a project we ran for them. And the project cost $100,000, so it's a pretty good return for investment. I can tell you that you're supposed to swipe on the tram, but many people have a valid ticket, but they don't, such as people that get on off the train, they get on and they paid for the ticket on the train like a day ticket, and they're perfectly valid ticket, but they're supposed to swipe on the tram, but they don't because, you know, they don't have to. If their ticket was checked, they would be valid. They should swipe on. So we do have this problem, and in fact, your anecdote's a really good one, because some people don't pay their fare because they see other people's not swiping on, and they think, well, if they're getting away with it, why would I pay the ticket? So that's a very good anecdote. It does happen on trams. We do have high fare evasion rates on trams, but it has been reduced over the last few years, actually.
Hi, Graham. Philip Endersby. And I agree entirely with your synopsis there that we'll probably have 5 nodal cities around Melbourne, 20 and 30 years down the track. The thing that I think about is that when we go to some of the big cities around the world, and my comment would be our ring road structure. Have we planned for the 2nd and 3rd ring road, and have we put the land aside? Where are we with the Port of Hastings, so that we then develop that area? And in the 3rd one is our airport, say 20 kilometres east of Cranbourne, because we're driving everyone west, yet we're driving everyone east for the future of living.
Okay, there's a big question about the entire future of the world. What's the answer? Well, yes. Have we planned for everything? No. Do cities ever? I have seen some centrally planned. I worked a lot in China, and I remember driving out to the 8th ring road in China 30 years ago, which now is heavily overdeveloped now. So they centrally plan everything. I'm not too sure they get great outcomes, though. And you can plan things too far, I think. Are we doing a good job? Well, certainly the road planning has been at a high quality, I think. But those worlds have changed now, and we need to do other things, which is where we start needing vast infrastructure like we've been proposing now. I do think these are positive things in the long run. Airports, of course, Avalon is the other big one and an opportunity. And the Western development of Melbourne, I think, will enhance. Hard to know where to talk about what you're talking about there, because I think we could do with more strategic planning. In fact, a big critique from me would be the Suburban Rail Loop, our largest new infrastructure project, really has had very little public open planning, and it could probably do with more.
It's David here. Graham, so speaking of China, I've read in a newspaper somewhere that China has these driverless electric buses that run along strips, and it only costs, what is it, $1 million a kilometre or something?
Yeah.
Could you correct me or elucidate and say if there's any application to Australia for these?
Well, I was going to mention it actually, but I did wonder if I was talking too much. So this is a new development, and it really is a great one in technology, where we've had light rails and trams and buses, boring buses with wheels and trundling around and, chugging away, bad ride quality and so forth. Wouldn't it be good if somewhere in the middle we could come together with these two technologies? Well, the answer is that has happened. There's quite a lot of developments of this in Europe, but China has the best version, I think. It's called the Advanced Passenger Vehicle, developed by a railway company, not a bus company. CRRC is the largest railway company in the world that developed it. I have been on it. I made a point of going to that. I teach in China. I took a lot of students. I deliberately broke the rules there. They like to manage trips of the professor so that they can show them things the way they want to show them. I made a point of going early and inspecting them myself before they told me what it was. I found some very bad things, actually, and they weren't going to tell me about that. But the fact is, I was so impressed, I really couldn't, I was very excited. You're quite correct. At the moment, a tram in Melbourne costs between $8 and $10 million per vehicle just to buy it. These vehicles will probably be $1 to $2 million each. Similar capacity. The ride quality is better than a Melbourne tram, because there's a way of measuring it these days, and that's one of the things I did on my little trip. Although Melbourne trams do have bad ride quality. So there are many good features here. Now, are we going to change our trams and get rid of them? No. But we have had a long need in the middle and outer suburbs for medium quality mass transit, and buses have struggled to provide that. I think this is a real opportunity for the future of Melbourne. And, you know, we'll have a trial in the next few years in Perth. And I think we should be looking at that and taking up that opportunity, because it's a cost-effective way of expanding things in a progressive way. So I'm very excited about it.
Graham, it's Peter Berg speaking. My question is sort of around, I think Melbourne is still planned to be the fastest growing capital city in Australia over the next 10 or 20 years. Given one of the bad gridlocks in traffic is on the Westgate Bridge going to and from both ends of the day, why haven't we got a fast train to Geelong? And is it still like 10 or 15 years away? It just seems preposterous that we have not been planning to get that city grown.
Yes.
To take some of the population and growth from here to Geelong.
Yeah, Westgate Bridge, very, very impressive piece of infrastructure. You know, it's ugly as hell, to be frank. You know, I wish it looked like Sydney Harbour Bridge, but it just isn't as good. But you know, that bridge was never designed to do what it does today. It's been retrofitted over the years in one of the most amazing engineering feats, which none of us talk about. We changed that bridge as it's standing and working to actually do what it does today. And here's a simple fact for you all to take away and tell everybody. The new metro we're building, opening in 2 years' time, that will carry more people than 5 Westgate freeways will in the morning. 5 times. So if we wanted to carry that many people with a freeway, we'd have to have built 5 Westgate freeways into Melbourne. Okay? It's that scale. And that's why we need mass transit. Yes, if we have fast rail to Geelong, there is a project at the moment to do something like that. How fast it will be, I don't know. I was involved in the regional fast train project, which never achieved any fast speeds because we all found out that regional trains, the infrastructure just wasn't going to handle it, and we had to redesign the infrastructure just to modernize it. Yeah, we need to be more progressive and doing more of this. And that's just one anecdote about the future of Melbourne, where we're growing. We are planned to be the size of London is today, easily within 15, 20 years. And frankly, there is a long-term view that says we're going to be Tokyo. Yeah, we will be the size of Tokyo. And when you start thinking about that, the idea of a suburban rail loop suddenly makes a bit of sense. You know, I completely get your anecdote. Why am I going to have a driverless train at high capacity, like Tokyo, between 2 places where not many people travel between? But if we were Tokyo, that suddenly starts becoming an essential. Okay, thanks very much.
We could talk all afternoon, Graham.
Yes,
Thank you. Thank you again for an excellent presentation and thought-provoking around the future of our public transport, what we can do. There's a bit of information I would add. If you want more information about the suburban rail loop, the Auditor General's report from last year was quite enlightening about the planning, the execution and the business case. And if you want to really know about what happened with the Westgate Bridge, it's quite the engineering innovation, and it's carbon fibre reinforced. It was the best in its, first in class, best in its world when it was done. So if you're an engineering nerd like me, you can look that up as well. But aside from that, that's why I love working with Graham. Aside from that, Graham, it's been a delightful afternoon presentation. Thank you so much for your time and being generous. And Rotary Melbourne, on behalf of President Adrian as well, I'd like to present you with this wee gift, which is the special goodies made by Phil Endersby and his team.
Thank you very much.
So please join me in thanking Graham. Thank you. Thanks very much.